You trust your government to protect you, to keep you safe, to tell you the truth, to treat you as a human being with rights and dignity and value. What if I told you that the same government that asks for your taxes, your votes, and your sons and daughters in times of war secretly used its own citizens as laboratory animals? Not once, not twice, 5 times that we know of. And the word no is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because every single case in this video was hidden, classified, destroyed, denied, some for decades, some forever. These are not conspiracy theories. These are confirmed, documented, admitted by the United States government itself, in congressional hearings, in declassified files, in official apologies that came 20, 30, 40 years too late to help the people who suffered. Today on the Dark Ledger, we are opening 5 of the darkest files in American government history. Stay until case number 1. Because that one was not just sanctioned by the government, it was celebrated. Washington, D.C. The Cold War is at its peak. The United States government is terrified, not of bombs, not of missiles, of something far more unsettling. Mind control. Soviet and Chinese intelligence agencies were rumored to have developed techniques to completely reprogram a human being, to make them confess to crimes they did not commit, to betray their country, to become someone else entirely. And so the CIA launched a program to develop the same capability. They called it MK Ultra. What followed was one of the most extensive and systematic violations of human rights ever conducted on American soil. Between 1953 and 1973, the CIA conducted experiments on an estimated 150 individual research projects, involving thousands of American and Canadian citizens who had absolutely no idea what was being done to them. The primary tool was LSD, but not in the way you might imagine. CIA operatives set up fake safe houses. They called them safe houses, but they were traps. In San Francisco and New York, they lured in men from the streets, homeless people, drug addicts, people society would not notice missing, people who would not be believed. They dosed them with massive quantities of LSD, then watched what happened through one-way mirrors, taking notes. The project went further. Mental hospitals across the United States were recruited, unknowingly to patients, knowingly to certain staff, to dose their patients with experimental substances. People who were already vulnerable, already voiceless, already locked away from the world. Universities were recruited, researchers were given secret CIA funding and told to experiment on their students. Soldiers were used, prisoners were used, psychiatric patients were used. One man, Frank Olson, a U.S. Army biochemist who worked on the program, was secretly dosed with LSD by his CIA colleagues at a work retreat. 9 days later, he fell from a 13th floor window in New York City. His death was ruled a suicide. His family spent decades fighting to prove otherwise. His body was exhumed in 1994. A forensic pathologist found evidence consistent with a blow to the head before the fall. No one was ever charged. In 1973, when a congressional investigation began closing in, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MK Ultra files. Thousands of documents gone. Except one set of files was misfiled in a financial records building and survived the purge. Those files were discovered in 1977. They confirmed everything. In 1977, the Senate held hearings. Survivors testified. The CIA admitted the program existed. The people who ran it retired comfortably on government pensions. Not a single person was ever prosecuted. And here is the question that keeps researchers awake at night. If they destroyed the files, how much are we not seeing? (1932) Macon County, Alabama, 400 Black American men, sharecroppers, farmers, laborers, men living in one of the poorest counties in one of the poorest states in America, men who had almost nothing, men who had almost no access to health care. They were told the United States Public Health Service wanted to help them, that they would receive free medical examinations, free meals, free burial insurance, free treatment for what doctors called bad blood. They were not told what bad blood actually was. It was syphilis, and they were not being treated for it. They were being watched. The United States government wanted to study what happened to the human body when syphilis was left completely untreated, and they had chosen these men because they were black, because they were poor, because they were powerless to be their subjects. This continued for 40 years. 40 years. When penicillin was confirmed as a cure for syphilis in 1947, the study continued. The men were not given penicillin. When the men were drafted during World War II and the military attempted to treat their syphilis, government officials intervened. The men were returned to the study, untreated. When the men developed complications, heart disease, blindness, mental deterioration, the slow destruction of their bodies from the inside, the government watched, took notes. Many of them died. Their wives were infected. Their children were born with congenital syphilis. For 40 years, this continued. The study was not ended because someone developed a conscience. It was ended in 1972 because a whistleblower named Peter Buxton, a public health service employee who had been trying to stop the study for years through internal channels and been ignored, finally leaked the story to a journalist. The Washington Star broke the story on July 25, 1972. The public reaction was immediate and devastating. The study was terminated. In 1997, 65 years after it began, President Bill Clinton formally apologized on behalf of the United States government. 8 survivors were still alive to hear it. Herman Shaw, 94 years old, sat in the White House and listened to the President of the United States apologize for what had been done to him and the men he knew. He said he was glad the truth had finally come out. He said he hoped it would never happen again. The files were never destroyed. They are in the National Archives. Every decision, every meeting, every note, all documented, all signed, all carried out by employees of the United States government who went home to their families every evening. September 1950, San Francisco Bay. A U.S. Navy minesweeper sailed slowly along the coastline just outside the city. On the deck, concealed equipment spraying an aerosol mixture into the ocean wind blowing toward the shore. The mixture contained Serratia marcescens, a bacteria, and Bacillus globigii, another bacteria, chosen because they were believed to be harmless and because they were easy to track once dispersed into the air. The Navy wanted to know how a biological weapon attack on an American coastal city would spread, how far the particles would travel, how many people would be exposed, which neighborhoods, which buildings, which populations. To find out, they needed to use a real city. They chose San Francisco. 800,000 people were exposed without their knowledge or consent. The aerosol cloud drifted over the city for 6 days. Within weeks, a significant cluster of patients arrived at Stanford University Hospital with a rare urinary tract infection caused by Serratia marcescens. A man named Edward Nevin, a retired pipefitter who had been admitted to hospital for a routine procedure, died. His death was the first confirmed fatality linked to the operation. His family did not discover the truth until 1976, 26 years later, when the operation was revealed during a Senate investigation into government bioweapon testing. His grandson took the government to court. The judge ruled the government had discretionary authority to conduct the test. The family received nothing. San Francisco was not the only target. Between 1949 and 1969, the U.S. military conducted at least 239 open-air biological and chemical warfare tests over American cities and populated areas. Minneapolis, St. Louis, Corpus Christi. In St. Louis, a low-income, primarily black neighborhood, the Army sprayed what they told local officials was a smokescreen to test radar equipment. It was zinc cadmium sulfide, a chemical with known toxic properties, being sprayed directly over residential areas, schools, and playgrounds. Children played outside while the military drove spraying machines through their streets. The full health impact has never been fully studied, because for the longest time, Nobody knew it happened. March 1954. Bikini Atoll, the Marshall Islands, Pacific Ocean. The United States detonated a nuclear bomb. Castle Bravo, the largest nuclear device ever tested by the United States. Its yield was 2.5 times larger than predicted. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The radioactive fallout cloud spread across thousands of miles of Pacific Ocean. It reached the inhabited islands of Rongelap and Utrecht, home to Marshallese people who had no idea a test was happening that day. The fallout rained down on them for hours. Children played in the white powder that fell from the sky, thinking it was snow. They had never seen snow. Within hours, people began vomiting. Their skin burned. Their hair fell out. The United States Navy evacuated them 2 days later. 2 days. Not immediately, not the same day. 2 days after the fallout began. And then something deeply disturbing happened. Instead of treating the Marshallese people and monitoring their health as patients, the United States Atomic Energy Commission launched a program called Project 4.1. Its stated purpose was to study the effects of nuclear fallout on human beings. The Marshallese were not patients, they were research subjects. Blood samples were taken, tissue samples, urine. Their bodies were measured and documented as the radiation sickness progressed. Medical care was secondary to data collection. The people of Rongelap, who desperately wanted to return to their home island, were actually returned in 1957, even though the United States government's own scientists knew the island was still contaminated. They were returned because the contamination provided an ongoing research opportunity. A 1956 document, later declassified, stated the Rongelapese were being treated as a relatively uncontaminated control group. People were living on a radioactive island, so the government could study what happened to them. The cancer rates among the Marshallese people in subsequent decades were devastating. Thyroid cancer, leukemia, birth defects that locals called jellyfish babies, children born without bones, without eyes, without the ability to survive outside the womb. The United States government paid compensation, eventually, after decades of legal battles. The amounts were widely considered inadequate. The Marshallese people are still fighting today. Their islands are still contaminated. The data collected from their suffering is still in U.S. government files. Everything you have heard so far, MK Ultra, Tuskegee, Sea Spray, Project 4.1. Every one of those programs was something the United States government did to people. Case number 1 is different, because case number 1 is about what the United States government allowed someone else to do, and then helped them get away with it. Unit 731 was a covert biological and chemical warfare research unit of the Imperial Japanese Army operating in Manchuria, China between 1935 and 1945. What happened inside Unit 731 is among the most extreme documented examples of human experimentation in recorded history. Prisoners of war, Chinese civilians, Korean civilians, Russian prisoners, Allied POWs were subjected to experiments with no anesthesia and no possibility of survival. Vivisection, the surgical examination of living patients, was performed to study the effects of disease progression. Subjects were infected with plague, cholera, typhoid, anthrax. They were frozen alive to study frostbite. They were placed in pressure chambers to study the effects of atmospheric pressure changes on the human body. They were spun in centrifuges. They were exposed to lethal doses of radiation. Nobody who entered the experimental chambers at Unit 731 left alive. Estimates of the death toll range from 3,000 to over 200,000 people. When the Soviet Union declared war on Japan in August 1945, Unit 731, Commander Shiro Ishii, ordered the facility destroyed and all prisoners executed. The buildings were blown up. The records were burned. Ishii and his team fled. They were captured by American forces. And here is the decision that has never been fully accounted for. General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in the Pacific, authorized a secret deal, full immunity from war crimes prosecution for Ishii, for his entire team, for every member of Unit 731, in exchange for one thing: the data, all of it, every experiment, every result, every finding produced through the torture and murder of thousands of human beings. The United States government wanted the biological warfare research data that Unit 731 had collected, and it was willing to let war criminals walk free to get it. The deal was kept secret for decades. The Soviet Union prosecuted 12 members of Unit 731 at the Khabarovsk war crime trials in 1949. The United States dismissed the trials as communist propaganda. Shiro Ishii died at home in Tokyo in 1959, in his bed, of natural causes, surrounded by his family. Not a single member of Unit 731 was ever prosecuted by the United States or Japan. The data they produced, collected through crimes so severe that even hardened prosecutors at Nuremberg describe them as unprecedented, is classified in U.S. government files to this day. And somewhere in those files, the results of experiments conducted on human beings who had names and families and lives are being kept, for reasons the government has never fully explained.
5 programs. MK Ultra, your own intelligence agency, dosing Americans with experimental drugs and watching them break. Tuskegee, 400 men told they were being helped while they were watched dying for 40 years. Operation Sea Spray, 800,000 people in San Francisco breathing military bioweapons on their morning commute. Project 4.1, an entire people returned to a radioactive island because their suffering produced useful data. Unit 731, war criminals handed immunity and comfortable retirements in exchange for data collected through mass murder. These were not rogue operations run by lone bad actors. These were approved, funded, staffed, documented, and in most cases, defended by the government of the United States of America. The question is not whether governments are capable of this. The files prove they are. The question is what they are capable of that is not yet in any file, that has not yet been leaked, that has not yet been declassified, that is still, right now, happening to people who have no idea. Every secret leaves a trace. The dark ledger follows them. Subscribe, because the next file we open is one that was only declassified last year. Leave a comment below. Which of these 5 cases angers you the most? I read every single one